Hi, I'm Ryan Smansky, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we're going to talk about what we're going to do to the underside of the ship while we're in dry dock. Specifically, how we plan on painting it. First things first, we don't plan on painting the bottom of the ship while we're in dry dock. It's not what I mean. The whole point of the project is to coat the underside of the ship so that we're preserving it. But you don't paint ships, especially nowadays. You apply a system of coatings. So we are planning on applying the most effective system of coatings we can, and we're hoping to find a product that'll give us at least 30 years, certainly 20 or more, because it has been over 30 years since the ship was last in dry dock, and it will likely be 30 years or more before we are next in dry dock. So, what sorts of things are we looking for when we apply a system of coatings to the underside of the ship? It's worth pointing out that we have not picked a specific product yet. We haven't contracted for that because we haven't contracted with the yard. That's still a work in process. It's currently going back and forth between legal right now, so we're not even really involved. We just have to wait for them to get there. And of course, the holiday season has delayed things. So that is sort of pushing everything back, and until we have an actual signed contract with the yard, we can't go out and buy paint or cut the mast off the ship or pay for any of these other services because, you know, things might not happen, or they certainly might not happen on the time frame that we initially planned. The number one reason that us or any other ship goes into dry dock for just periodic maintenance, obviously notwithstanding major damage that needs to be repaired, but the number one reason that a ship like us would go into dry dock for periodic maintenance is to refresh the system of coatings on the underside of the hull. Ships, particularly steel-hulled ships like this, we build them and then we immediately put them in the substance that destroys them. Water and oxygen combine to try and return steel back to the iron oxide that it naturally is in the ground. So the thing that we do to keep that from happening is cover them with paint, or a system of coatings in our case. And that system of coatings basically just forms a waterproof barrier between the steel and the water. It has a finite lifespan, and so after a period of years it starts to come off. Also, abrasion, damage, things like that can cause it to come off quicker. Imperfections in the underlayer of steel. For example, if there's already a rust spot that you don't treat and you put more paint over it, well, that spot is going to continue to rust. So, it is critically important that we treat the undersides of these ships periodically. The good news is that major paint companies have developed really good immersion grade systems of coatings. When we started talking with companies about it, many of them pitched what they have done on Navy ships. And we rejected most of those systems of coatings because it's not really what we need. Here, I've got a pretty great model of the ship sitting on blocks that are not too dissimilar from keel blocks. And I like this model of the ship. This is how she would have looked in May of '43, right after commissioning, in her quote-unquote Black Dragon configuration, because it gives you a really great visual distinction between the various parts of the hull. And our hull comes in three different colors here, three different colored bands that require different systems of coatings. So you can see that you've got the blue section, the top part, that is your freeboard. You've got the black section, which is your boot topping. That is on the wind-water line. And then you've got your red section, which is your underwater hull, and that is the part that we are primarily going to focus on when we're in dry dock. Our freeboard is roughly, these are just some rough numbers, it's not a perfect measurement, but it's roughly about 50,000 square feet of surface area. And that surface area needs the least expensive, the least performing system of coatings, because it's normally dry. And so it's going to last a long time. It does need some sort of UV barrier because the sunlight breaks down most types of coatings that you would apply. With our current level of funding, however, we're not even going to worry about painting the freeboard. We can do that sitting here by the pier, and it would be cheaper than doing it in the yard. So we will likely put painting the freeboard off until the year after we come back from dry dock. Now, if we're able to get big donations, like I said, that's the cheapest area of the hull to paint because it doesn't need such a big system of coatings, and we don't see rust. You see what's called running rust. There is rust stains coming out of deck drains and things like that. The insides of pipes that you can't paint are rusty, and so when the water comes through, it picks that up and runs it down the side of the ship. But you don't see paint flaking off the hull, you don't see bare metal, you don't see rust on that freeboard area because it's generally in good shape, stays dry most of the time. So we could really just go through and give it a light pressure washing and put another top coat on top of it. The underlayer is perfectly intact until one of two main things happens. UV deteriorates the top coat and starts eating away the underlayer, or the temperature switches cause the steel to expand and contract to the point that it pops that layer off. But fortunately, the base metal under it, they got a really good white metal, so there's no rust there. And so the coatings have lasted really well. So again, we're not worrying about that. The boot topping is the part that's the most in danger and will likely get the most expensive system of coatings. That represents about 7,000 square feet. And for us, what we're looking at as our wind water line as a stationary vessel is approximately 2 feet above and 2 feet below our normal water line. So we're pretty far up the Delaware River here. We're not getting much in the way of wave action, even on really windy days, which we get plenty of here on the river. So this stuff is a really endangered place in the coatings because it is constantly getting wet, getting dry, getting wet, getting dry. And that constant swing has a really deteriorating effect on the coatings underneath. If something is permanently submerged in water, it usually stays relatively intact. If something is permanently dry, it usually stays relatively intact. But this constantly wet and dry cycle at the wind-water line causes all sorts of issues. So we want the highest possible buildup of system of coatings there. And that's where we're expecting to see the most pitting, the most damage, and so we'll have to do some other things before we even apply that system of coatings. And then the largest area, at approximately 125,000 square feet, is the underwater hull. And you look at this and you say, hey, the bottom of the ship doesn't look so much larger than the above water part of the ship, especially since we're riding higher than we normally would in service. So how is that 2.5 times the above water, the freeboard surface area? Well, remember, we've also got the entire flat bottom of the ship as well. So the underwater hull of the ship would traditionally have a system of coatings on it, and then the most expensive layer, the top coat, in this instance, would be an anti-fouling layer. And anti-fouling layers often will have different materials in them, whether they're coppers or other sorts of things that are generally poisonous to marine growth. So the undersides of the ships tend to get fouled up with plants, with mollusks and other types of growth, sea life, growing on the hull of the ship. And that's very bad for two reasons. On an active ship that's actually sailing around, it's going to create a lot of additional drag and will slow you down. But more concerning is that growth has to attach to the side of the ship. How does it do that? It like burrows roots and other tendrils into the coating to hold on to it. And so not only is this bottom layer usually a little bit repulsive to that sort of stuff, a little bit poisonous, I'm going to use for lack of a better word in my vocabulary, but also it's designed for a ship that is moving so that part of the coating sloughs off as you're sailing around, and with it will come all the growth that's on it. For museum ships, that's not really necessary. One, we're not getting the benefit of it sloughing off because we're not moving. Sure, the tide is going to be doing a little bit of that. Our tidal flow is normally 5 or 6 knots here, something like that. So that might do a little bit, but really not what the coating is designed for. And the other reason, retaining speed by keeping growth on there, we're permanently moored. We're not going anywhere. We're not worried about speed. Also, being this far up the Delaware River in relatively cold climate, we don't get nearly as much marine growth as, say, ships in Southern California or the Gulf Coast might get. So we're not so worried about these really thick levels of growth that are then going to eat away our coating by burrowing holes in it with their root system. So 2 of the main questions that we've gotten are we going to paint the bottom of the ship red, which is the traditional American color of anti-fouling paint, and are we going to apply anti-fouling paint? And the answers to those questions are, the short answers at least, are we don't really know yet, but not necessarily, and almost certainly not. So, are we going to paint it red? If there's any additional cost associated with that, probably not. Like I said, the red paint is the traditional color. When we get the ship out of the water, we will likely see that it is red, and normally our goal is to replace things as close to the original as possible. So that means if we find red paint, we would replace it with red paint. However, this is below the water. You can't see it. So again, if there is an extra cost associated with tinting the system of coatings we're going to use to be this red color, we're almost certainly not going to do it so that we can spend that money better other places. If there isn't an extra cost, then yeah, we're going to do whatever the base color we find under there is. And it's worth pointing out that it's not always red. There are other colors of anti-fouling bottom paint. But traditionally on Navy ships in the U.S. Navy, it's usually red. Other museum ships have not necessarily painted their bottoms red. I don't believe Texas is planning on that. You should go over to their channel and see the work that they're doing and what their plans are. Another example is the Coast Guard cutter Taney in Baltimore. We got to work on her in dry dock, and her bottom was all black from the last time they had dry docked her in the early 2000s, and this time around we painted the bottom gray. But we ran out of the gray paint, so if memory serves correctly, there was a section that we painted white, or it might have been black, but it wasn't a perfect monochromatic coating all the way around the hull. Again, people can't see it, and within a couple of weeks in the water, it's going to start to lose that color anyway, and it's going to go to a really faded blackish color regardless. Missouri, likewise in Pearl Harbor, I'm fairly certain she painted her underside of the hull the same gray as they painted the above water part of the hull. Not all museum ships do this. For example, Slater, when she was out of the water, her staff painted her the exact same colors that she was in World War II, which is great. That's ideal preservation practice. Hopefully we'll be able to do that, but again, it's not a guarantee. In the grand scheme of things, it's potentially a lot of money for something that you won't be able to tell. Another thing, are we applying anti-fouling paint? Almost certainly no, for mostly reasons I've discussed already. It is the most expensive coating possible. It isn't necessary and would not work properly for us as a moored vessel. And, most importantly, this ship did not get anti-fouling paint when she was mothballed in the 90s. She does not have anti-fouling paint on her right now. So, it is in fact more accurate to this ship in her current configuration to not put anti-fouling paint on there. So, just briefly to wrap up this video, what is a system of coatings going to look like for us? Again, it's we haven't contracted with anyone. Different companies have different products, so I can't give you an exact, oh, we're going to use this and this and this. That'll be in a future video, probably months down the road. But what it will likely look like is we will do an ultra-high pressure wash of the hull to get all the old coatings off and any rust. That's going to get us to a white metal surface, or a nearly white metal surface that is going to have virtually no rust on it. We're going to put down a primer. For things like pits and wasted rivets, we're not going to repair most of those with welding. We're going to use a liquid metal type thing that you trowel on to fill in those holes. Because the ship's hull is riveted, if we try to weld on it near rivets, that causes the metal to heat up and expand. And with 80-year-old rivets, that will potentially cause the rivets to pop. So we try and patch that rivet. Remember, there's a rivet right next to it. That one heats up and pops. And so you end up chasing this rivet all the way down the seam of the ship. We can't replace them with rivets because there's a really high cost associated with riveting a ship. It's not something we do anymore. There are folks who still know how to do it, primarily on the Great Lakes, but it's really expensive to replace rivets. So we're going to trowel on a liquid metal that's going to fill in those pits, prevent rust from building up in there, and really smooth out the hull so that we get the thickness back that we're supposed to have. Then we're going to apply a system of coatings. They will most likely be epoxy coatings. Epoxies attach really well to each other. You can't necessarily just take a water-based paint and throw it on top of an epoxy or an alkali on top of whatever, because they don't necessarily attach to each other really well. And different systems of coatings have other coatings in that system that they work really well with, and other coatings that they don't adhere to at all. So we're going to use most likely epoxies, because most epoxies attach really well to most other epoxies and have a decent recoat window on them that we can get it all to bind up into a really good complete system. And we're going to build up a series of coatings, possibly more around the wind-water line than the below-water hull, just because that's the area that is the most in danger. But it's going to be 3 or 4 coatings of these things, and there may well be a top coat, particularly the wind-water line, that's going to act as the UV barrier. But no anti-fouling paints or ablative paints or anything like that on the surface. We may mix in other things, such as glasses. When Taney went into Drydock, they mixed the glass into the paint that just made the paint stronger, like a fiberglassy type thing. So we might do something like that. Again, that's fairly expensive. So some of it may come down to what is the condition of the coatings and the hull underneath when we actually get her out of the water. There is a large part of this project that is, well, how much liquid metal do we need to fill in pits? We won't know until we take her out of the water. In the late 80s, the hull was very pitted and they had to do a lot of repairs. But she shouldn't be as an inactive ship, and we may find that the hull is in really, really good condition. Certainly we haven't found many issues come through. So that's really going to determine what sort of product we end up using at the end of the day. So what are some other questions you guys have about the system of coatings we're planning on at this time, or about what other museum ships are doing, or about other stages of this dry dock? Let us know in the comment section down below. We may answer in a future dry dock video. This video is answering you guys' common questions about what color is the bottom of the ship going to be, and what are we going to use anti-fouling paint. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to continue supporting this project. The more support we get from you guys, the better the better the products we can use, the more work we can do, the better the end result of this project can be. And we really appreciate the support you guys have all given us so far. It's allowing us to do this project. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.